What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up the top 10 decks of the week, and it's going to be all the new decks from Triumphant Light that had a few tournaments since its release. It's obviously only been a couple of days, but the meta is already starting to shake up. So, of course, we are on Play Limitless TCG.com, and if you guys want to know where to go to kind of see like what's going on, what you do is on the top bar, I'll pull this down a bit, you go up to decks, you click on there, you go over here, you have a little button, you choose your game, you choose Pokemon TCG Pocket, and the format will be standard, and it will automatically be updated already to the Triumphant Light set, which means ever since the release of Triumphant Light, this is all the stats for those decks. But what we're going to do is we're going to just get right into it, and we're going to be starting with the new Gallade. In fact, nothing has really changed all that much about this deck. However, it is running about a 52% win rate right now. Again, of course, it's only a couple of days, but this deck has a chance to shine a little bit now that the main deck in the game is no longer, at least as of right now, Executor EX Celebi. So the reason why, or reasons, one of them, this deck couldn't really flourish that much is because a lot of the decks that we were playing against, if we were playing a Gallade deck in tournament spaces, we're going to be more often facing up against Executor EX, which means you're only facing up against a Pokemon with one energy attached to it. Now that Leafeon, and we'll get into that deck a little bit later, has kind of replaced the Executor deck, at least for the grass type archetype, we are now going to be seeing a lot more decks playing a lot more energy. We're still seeing things like Darkrai and Magnezone, who all take at least 3 energy, if not 4 or more, because Darkrai allows, of course, you want to be playing sometimes more than 3 to get that extra 20 damage. The Magnezones, of course, will have a minimum of 3 if it wants to attack. Leafeon now will have 3 minimum. Again, it might even have more if we are attaching more energies to the Leafeon, if we don't have something else on the bench. We now have Arceus in the meta. That's a minimum of 3 as well. Dialga and Manaphy decks are still very strong. In fact, Dialga decks are probably the stronger decks right now with Arceus, so there's going to be a lot of energy ramping, and we're obviously going to be ramping on Pokemon that need a fair bit of energy, a minimum of 3. So Gallade actually has kind of the ability to be very strong, and of course we're going to be playing this over something like an Alakazam. First of all, one, it has 170 HP, which is very strong. There's very few Pokemon that's going to one-shot this at all, even with additional damage from things like Greninja, Darkrai, or Crobat, or whatever. Arceus and Crobat only do a total of 160. Of course, if you have Darkrai in that deck, you can do 180, but those decks actually aren't doing as well as some other Arceus Crobat decks. But anyways, this deck will allow you to also play that Hitmonlee Marshadow package, which is super duper strong in almost any fighting deck right now, because you have that to fall back on or to have as tech options in your deck. This deck is going to do very well, I think, going forward. How well, I'm not so sure. It's not that slow to get into. It does, of course, have to be a stage 2, but there's still stage 2 decks in the game. There's also, like, as a main attacker, it might be a little bit more harder to play, but we know that Charizard is a lot more consistent now because of Pokemon Communications. In this case, it's the same thing. We know Infernape's actually doing pretty good now. It was already a decent deck before, but still, but now it's doing a little bit better, and we'll get into that deck a little bit later as well. So this deck now has the ability to thrive in the meta because of where the meta is at. But anyways, let's move on to the deck number 9. These actually aren't in any specific order from best to worst or anything, but the next deck we're going to look at is the new Arceus Greninja deck. So a lot of people have been doing Arceus Crobat, obviously, because it will allow you to do 160 damage in one turn, because you get 30 from the Crobat, because Arceus is on the field, and then Arceus with a full bench will be able to do 130. This player and many other players have decided to play it with Greninja and Druddigon. I absolutely love this version of the deck, believe it or not. I think Greninja is still better than Crobat even in an Arceus deck because you have the versatility of being able to hit whatever you want. It is 10 less damage, but with things like Rocky Helmet and Druddigon, which this deck is playing, you do get to make up for those breakpoints. And not only that, but because Arceus, your main Pokemon, the main focus of your deck, your main attacker, is a colorless Pokemon, not only can you play water energy, but you can also play fire energy, which means your Druddigon has the ability to attack as well, which is super cool because if you're ever in a point in the game where you need to load that up and you have a 90 attacker on the board. Yes, 90 damage isn't great for 3 energies when it's 2 different energies requirement, but it has that one up that other Druddigon decks might not have. Now, this is also playing 1 copy of Heatran, which is pretty interesting as well, because of course it works with Arceus, and if your Pokemon, it does 40 damage for 2 fire energy. If the Pokemon you're attacking into already has damage on it, it does another 40, so a total of 80 for 2 energies on a basic is very strong and very consistent in this deck because you're playing Druddigons, because you're playing Greninja, and because you're playing a Rocky Helmet. And then, of course, because we're able to spread so much damage, we are playing 2 Cyrus. We're also playing 2 Leaf, which is very smart because this deck has a lot of Pokemon with 2 retreat costs, minimum of 4 and 5 if you count Heatran, but Heatran will get free retreat if Arceus EX is on the field. Very cool deck. I think this deck probably replaces, in my opinion, the Gyarados decks altogether, and Gyarados does a little bit more attack, but I do think this deck is probably the better version. And then the next deck is a Crobat Arceus deck. Now, the versions that are doing better than this, as per the stats right now, aren't even playing the Darkrai, which I'm actually kind of surprised about. Maybe I shouldn't be, and I think I know the reason why, and I'll get into it now. The versions that are doing better are either playing Crobat, Arceus, and a Heatran. I've seen versions playing Crobat, Arceus, and Carnivine. So there are different versions of the Crobat Arceus and seem to be doing stat-wise a little bit better than this version. And I think the reason is because at the beginning of the game, if you're trying to focus too much on your Darkrai to get those 20 points of damage, which I don't think you want to do, by the way, you want to focus on loading up on Arceus, and then once it's loaded up, you get that additional damage from your Darkrai after you've already loaded up your Arceus. Because what happens is if you load up your Darkrai, yes, you've done 60 damage over 3 turns, and then it's loaded up and you can do 80 damage, and then potentially 30 more if Crobats on the field. But once your Darkrai is gone, your Arceus has no energy on it. So if you can't knock out whatever's in the active at the time with your Darkrai because it's only doing 80 damage and the damage, or 100 damage for that turn, I guess, potentially 130. If you're not, 130 sometimes is not enough on a Pokemon that might be newly put into the active, and if you can't get it back out after doing some damage, then your Darkrai might get knocked out on the following turn, and then you have no attackers on the board, and so that could be a very big issue for this deck. You have 2 Pokemon in Darkrai and Arceus that require 3 energy each, so it is going to be tough to get them both loaded up when ramp decks are super duper strong right now. Leafeon, Magnezone, Dialga, Manaphy, decks that get multiple Pokemon loaded up before you get to in this deck, because there is no ramp, it's going to be very hard for this deck to be successful in any way, shape, or form. But I still think it's a very strong deck, and the stats is still about a 50% win rate. And once this deck gets going, it could it could sweep games technically, because again, you're doing 20 from your Darkrai, 130 from your Arceus, and 30 from your Crobat, which means you're doing, I think it's 170. And then if you add in Rocky Helmets and stuff like that, it's doing doing a lot of damage. Actually, it's 180. I did the math wrong. 130 plus 20 plus 30 is 180. So this can one-shot a ton of Pokemon. The issue, again, is if your Arceus gets knocked out and your Darkrai is not loaded up, or if your Darkrai gets knocked out and your Arceus isn't loaded up, the game is basically over at that point. But let's move on to the next deck. Infernape is going to be a lot better than it was before the release of Triumphant Light. And it's because we now have, first of all, the original decks were playing Moltres, which is a very good deck to play. It can load up your multiple Infernape or get an Infernape and something else loaded up so that Infernape can get multiple attacks off in a row with things like Dawn. Now what we can do is, because we have things like Heatran and Rotom who have the Speed Link ability because of Arceus EX, and once Arceus EX is on the board, they also have free retreat, which means you can attack with... you can load up something like a Rotom or a Heatran, attack with it, retreat, and then bring in an Infernape, you a Dawn, and then keep going back and forth like that if you need to, because all your Pokemon, essentially the ones that you're going to be attacking with, have free retreat. So your Infernape decks are actually getting a lot better because of Heatran and Arceus. I don't think you need to play Rotom, but the cool thing about Rotom is it is a colorless requirement attack, which means you still could only play fire energy. And on top of that, you can snipe and then pull whatever you sniped out with your Cyrus and then attack with your Infernape and knock it out. And not only that, I'm actually I'm kind of surprised we're not playing Capes over Rocky Helmet. It does help to get some additional damage, but 140 is pretty strong already, and 130 on your Arceus is also pretty strong. And you don't, like, I would assume by the time you get those out, you probably have already done a couple of attacks with either a Rotom or something else, maybe a Heatran, and you might not need them. And 190 or 160 on your Arceus, I think, is a lot more important than the Rocky Helmet. Again, I could be wrong. I'll let you decide. Moving on, next is the Vaporeon deck that we are used to seeing. But of course, now because we have Irida, this deck is going to probably get... I wouldn't say a lot better, but better. But I don't know if it's actually going to be the best water deck, and it's because I'm not going to talk too much about this deck because literally the only inclusion that's different is Irida. This deck is still playing sometimes 6 basics or 7 basics. 7 basics obviously helps a lot more to get your Manaphy, to help Manaphy load up multiple Pokemon the first turn that is trying to do that, because the more Pokemon basics you have in your deck, the more often you'll be able to start with multiple on your bench. So this player is playing 7. I still think I would probably play 6 with 2 Irida, 2 Misty, and 1 Leaf, but that's just me. But the water decks that are actually doing a lot better, and we'll get into them right now, is Arceus EX, Palkia EX 18 Trainer and Articuno EX 18 Trainer. So I'm sure you've heard other content creators say this, and maybe even me, the more cards that come out, more supporters, more items, more tools, and things like that, basically more trainers that come out, the better these 18 trainer decks are going to get. And now that water, usually Articuno EX was the first ever original 18 trainer deck. And then last format with Pachirisu, that was the big 18 trainer deck. And Articuno was doing good. I've never really reported on it because I thought it was same old Articuno. Obviously not same because more cards were added. But Pachirisu was able to be the best version of 18 trainer. Now water, Palkia and or Articuno is super good because of Irida. Literally, that's like pretty much the only reason, because basically you have like an Erica now for water type Pokemon, doing 40, healing 40 instead of 50, but it doesn't really change all that much. And because you can play 2 Irida, this deck's only playing 1. The Articuno version I have here is actually playing 2, which I would absolutely do. These cards can stay online a lot longer, which is exactly what you want to do, which is why you see things like blue in the deck as well, because you're only playing 2 Pokemon and you need them to stay on the field as long as you can, so you can chip damage over time and knock people out. Now, whether the Articuno or Palkia deck is which one's better, I think they're all both around right now, and it might drop a 56, 57 win percent. And I think they're both going to do really well. In fact, speaking of 18 trainer decks, the next couple of videos I'm going to come out with are actually a couple of 18 trainer decks, because I'm really looking forward to some of the decks I could build right now with that. Some of them are going to be pretty spicy, maybe even a Snorlax one. Yes, you heard it here first, Snorlax 18 trainer. I'm going to try it out. I actually think it will be pretty decent. Just wait till you see it. But 18 trainer doing very, very good right now. And yeah, so what is it actually better than the Manaphy Vaporeon deck? The stats say it is actually, but I still think I would prefer to play this. It's a little bit more of a grounded. There's a lot of issues this deck, an 18 trainer deck, could run into, especially in tournament play, but it is a very strong deck. The next deck is the Ramp Pardos Lucario deck. This deck was already doing super duper well. It just won the Ursi Day tournament, which was like around 1,500 people this week, which is usually around 16, 17, sometimes 18, almost 2,000 sometimes players, but always the biggest tournament, and it just won it. The only thing that was added to this deck is the new Sudowoodo, which does 20 damage, and then I think it's 30 more to the opponent's active Pokemon if it's in Pokemon EX. So with Lucario, it's doing 70 damage for 1 energy to a Pokemon EX. There are quite a bit of decks right now that lead or evolve, or their lead evolves into an EX Pokemon. So, of course, Dialga decks all lead with Dialga EX. A lot of Arceus decks will start with Arceus. Leafeon or Executor decks always want to lead with Eevee or Execute, which will, of course, evolve into Executor EX or Leafeon EX. Darkrai, of course, sometimes has to be the lead Pokemon. So you are going to get a ton of value out of Sudowoodo. And of course, Marshadow, things like Hitmonlee are still going to be very valuable in these types of decks because of their versatility and the way you can use them in games. Some games you don't need to use them, some games you will. And then, of course, Rampardos is just super strong. 1 energy, being able to do 130, potentially 150 or even higher because of Lucario or multiple. This deck just seems to keep getting better, and I'm happy it is, because the meta right now is really cool. So we have these really crazy aggressive decks that can do a lot of damage or mid-range damage for 1 energy. You have ramp decks like Magnezone decks, Leafeon decks, Dialga decks, Manaphy decks that can ramp out a ton of energy, get a ton of Pokemon loaded up. And then you have a bunch of decks that focus on healing, things like Erica, Irida, potions, capes, get those big HP up. Then we have Adamant in the game. I don't know if that'll start changing some things up in the future, but there's so many different decks that are actually doing really good right now. So, and different types of decks, different archetypes, not just like types in like fight-in or grass, but like the different types of decks, aggro, very defensive decks, healing decks, like stuff like that. So it's really, really cool and interesting meta right now. And then we got, this is probably the new best deck. In fact, I'll talk about it last because it actually is the best deck right now. But Eevee Leafeon EX has basically replaced the Executor EX deck as the 5 Pokemon grass type deck. Leafeon can basically get set up super duper fast because of its own ability. So, and then do consistently 70 damage over the course of the amount of turns that you're attacking with it. Whereas your Executor EX might only be doing 40 for 1 damage over the same amount of turns. Because we can ramp our leaf energy with Leafeon, we're only going to be playing things like water. So therefore, not only can we heal both of our Celebi and Leafeon with Erica, but with Irida as well. We're of course playing potions. Some versions are playing Rocky Helmet, some are playing Cape to get even more HP onto your Pokemon, which I do agree with. I don't think we need the Rocky Helmets, but again, I think Rocky Helmets have statistically always done better in these decks than capes, but those are usually the Executor decks that already have a bit more HP because Executor is 160 whereas Leafeon is 140. So maybe the Leafeon actually does want the capes. I'm not so sure. There actually is a deck that did this, a deck of Leafeon deck this week that did the best out of all of them, and it wasn't even playing water energies. It was just playing the Ericas, so no Irida. And that deck actually did better than the rest. So I think I'm not sure if this is actually the best version to be playing it with water or not, because that deck actually did, the one that's not playing Irida and only playing grass energies, actually placed better in the Ursa Day tournament than the rest of them. I think it was the Ursa Day tournament. It could be another tournament, but either way, its placement was the best out of the first couple of days of the tournament. But this deck, the last deck we're going to look at, is Dialga Arceus EX. So this deck has right now the biggest meta share. It has the highest win rate above all the other decks currently being played over the last couple of days since the release, and it's very strong. So Dialga, of course, this deck sometimes plays a Mew EX as well, or multiple Mew EX, and I've even seen versions actually play either or of these Shaman. By the way, these are two different Shaman. One has the ability to make your basic Pokemon have one less retreat cost. The other one has healing. So because we can ramp with our Dialga, we're able to first of all get our Arceus online very quickly, and we can also load up our own Dialga while doing that, and then we can also load up a second Dialga if we need to. So there are a ton of options. So I do agree, I do like the Mew EX in here a little bit better than the one without it, because then you have all these different options, whereas if you don't, you might not even get the Pokemon you want. You might be forced to only put Shamans on your bench, and I'm not really okay with that. This deck is playing one Adaman, which is fine. I don't think you need two in a deck that's only playing two Steel anyways, but this deck is also playing a bunch. It's playing 3 different tool cards. I definitely think you want the Giant Capes in this for sure. Your lead Pokemon Dialga is only going to be able to start attacking on its second turn of energy attachment, so you do need to be able to tank. I apologize. And Adamant and Giant Capes and Potions are going to allow you to do that, as well as the Shaman that allows you to heal. I also feel like I would maybe want to be playing 7 basics in the deck, especially in a deck that you can ramp into your Arceus a little quicker, because if you can actually get your Arceus online quicker with the Dialga than without it, then you need to make sure you have 3 bench Pokemon, right, in order to get its max value. So I wonder if there are versions that are playing 7 Pokemon, or people who have thought about playing 7 Pokemon, kind of like a Pikachu or a Manaphy deck. But anyways, this deck is the strongest deck right now, and what we can do is I can just go back. We can go Limitless here. I'm trying to get to it. Where the heck is it? The decks, and I can zoom in a bit here. And we can just look at some of the stats. As you can see, the Dialga has a 12, almost 13% meta share. We can just, has a 56.96, so basically a 57% win rate. Darkrai Magnezone still doing pretty good, 51%. Executor Celebi, as you can see, all the way down to 48%. I think this used to be like a 56 or even higher last season. Leafeon around a 50%. Articuno 55. This is Articuno 18 trainer. Charizard still a huge meta share, but only 47%. But that's the way Charizard will always be. It would always be probably below 50%, but will always do very, very good in tournaments still. Just there's going to be some players that do really well with it and some players that don't. Rampardos Lucario, almost a 55%. Arceus Crobat, this is the one without Darkrai, only doing 48%, almost 49%. Vaporeon Palkia 50%. Pachirisu EX now down below 50%. It used to be like a 53, 54. Darkrai Greninja still being played, but super duper low, 45%. Magnezone Skarmory, as you can see, still being played, but not doing that great. Did we talk about Darkrai? Yeah, Darkrai Magnezone still doing 51%. Weavile Darkrai down to 45%. It's so crazy how much the meta changes like that because of a single mini set. It's so insane. Palkia EX 18 Trainer 56%. So this is actually higher than the Articuno at 55. And then if we look at Infernape Arceus, the one we looked at ourselves, is the 52%. The Gallade deck also 52%. Gyarados Greninja is still 52% as well. Oh no, 49%. Sorry, first of all, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Yeah, so 49%. Darkrai Arceus is only just below 50%. Articuno Palkia EX. This, by the way, I'm pretty sure is like a 17 trainer deck instead of an 18 trainer deck. 52%. So the 18 trainer decks are actually better than the 17 trainer decks, funny enough. Arceus Magnezone, some people are experimenting with this. 49%, almost 50%. Garchomp decks are not good. 39%. So bad. The Infernape version, or the Moltres version of Infernape, way worse by like 6%. Than the Arceus version. Again, Palkia EX Articuno, basically the same thing as Articuno Palkia. You're just exchanging 2 for 1. And then Dialga Mew, which is, we just talked about this deck. It's literally this deck on the screen, except there's a Mew EX in it. And then Arceus Greninja, we already showed that deck with Druddigon at 50%. And then people are still trying to play Celebi Superior. I don't know why. Palkia EX Magnezone, 54%. That's actually really good. Probopass decks not doing good. Gallade Lucario not doing good. Yeah, not doing good at all. So yes, the deck we looked at did not have Lucario, and it's probably a lot more consistent and a lot better. Dialga Yanmega deck from last season wasn't the best, wasn't the worst. Was usually on top 10 lists, but not never in the top really. Executor EX Mew, all the Executor decks are doing really bad except for this one, but the play rate is super low, below, like less than 0.5%. And then Palkia Arceus, I actually think this deck is pretty decent, but a super low meta share. We can click on this and actually look at it. 16th place and 8th place. Let's look at this deck. 9 and 3. Yeah, 2 Manaphy, 2 Palkia, and 2 Arceus. This is probably a pretty good deck. You can probably fit a Shaman in here as well to get that one less retreats, especially since you're playing Dawn, and you're not even playing X speed, so I'm not really sure how you're playing Retreat and Dawn in the same turn. Although Manaphy, I guess it doesn't matter if Manaphy's loading up a ton of stuff. But yeah, the Dawn over, because you're also not playing Vaporeon. So this deck is probably really, really good. And I think even Vaporeon might be better in this. Oh no, you wouldn't put Vaporeon. You would not, because it can't work with Arceus basically. But anyways, that's it for the top 10 decks of the week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, keep cooking.